Brewing Network.
I think there's no more fitting way to kick this off than for us to do a little toast. So, Matt, I don't know if you want to say a couple words to the folks about what the festival's about and why you guys even do this.
Well, I think you know by now that the name of the game here is bringing in some of the best brewers from around the world. And certainly here in California, we're blessed with an amazing, even here in the Central Coast, we have a number of amazing breweries. But the point of this thing is to bring brewers in that maybe you've never had the chance to taste. I'm looking at Beer Aficio Ducato is one of the new ones this time around. And people that we've made friends with, people that we've collaborated with in the past. And the bottom line is it's about great beer and people like yourselves who enjoy great beer in a comfortable setting with some food, some pleasant Paso Robles weather this time. Thank you very much, Mother Nature.
Yes.
And so enjoy. Thank you so much for coming, and cheers to everyone.
To Firestone Invitational number 4. Raise your glasses, ladies and gentlemen. Cheers, Matt.
Cheers.
There we go. All right, we're going to get started with our first panel. Our second panel, a little later, actually, is going to have Beer Aficio Ducato on the panel. We're doing an international beer panel. But this one right now is about sour beer. I'm pretty sure that 1, 2, or all of you like sour beer. It's one of the best things that's ever been made in the human race. And I'm excited to invite our guests up here. We've got, I think you might recognize some of them, but I'll introduce them anyway. Well, we'll start with Vinnie Cilurzo from Russian River Brewing Company. Come on up here, Vinnie. I am one of only 3 people on earth that pronounce his last name correctly. Cilurzo, right? It is not Cilurzo. It is not Cilurzo. It's Cilurzo. And I've worked for 10 years to get that right. Vinnie, welcome to the panel. Vinnie's pouring beatification for you guys today. Oh, it's out. It's not even beatification.
We're pouring Pilsner.
Now it's Pilsner, which, by the way...
It's like bringing a spoon to a knife fight.
All right, you're having Russian River Pilsner, and if you're going to complain about that, then go away. We don't want you anyway. Next, I would like to invite up to the stage Jim Crooks, who is the barrel master at Firestone Barrelworks. Yeah. That's right, one of the new programs at Firestone Walker. We've all been waiting for them to do some wonderful barrel projects, and now Jim is the man responsible for that. Jim, thank you for having us here. Chad Yakobson from Crooked Stave. Yes, that name I might have screwed up. How'd I do, Chad? Yakobson? Yakobson! God damn it. 10 years isn't enough. Chad, thanks for coming back to the stage. Welcome, man. I had your, I was told it was like a blueberry sour, but it was red, and it tasted like a framboise. Was I told wrong, or was it a red-looking blueberry sour beer? It is blueberries. So I'm the idiot, as usual.
Extraction from the skin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely blueberry.
It was blueberry.
That's the color you get from the skins.
Oh, okay. Oh, and it totally tasted like blueberries, too, so...
Yep, definitely.
Okay, good. And then finally, we've got Luke Dickinson from Wicked Weed Brewing Company, my new favorite sour beer-making company in the country. Yeah. Luke is my favorite, not only because you're making amazing beer, but because you usually get me drunk late at night with it.
This is true.
Yeah.
Last night was no exception.
Last night was no exception, which is why I'm hungover today.
Yeah.
But at least it wasn't as bad as the first time where Luke made me take him to Denny's at 3 in the morning after we got drunk.
This is true. I remember most of that.
Yes. We ate formaldehyde-soaked omelets.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
Apparently that happened.
All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk sour beer for, 30 minutes or so. We're going to learn about the beers that we have here. We might even learn about the Pilsner. That'll be okay if you want to talk about that, Vinnie. Since that's what you brought to the knife fight. And then you can ask questions as well. We've got a microphone right up here at the stage. And if you have any questions for the guys, then feel free to come up here and do so. My name's Justin Crosley. I'm with the Brewing Network. And I'm just the person lucky enough to get to interview these guys from time to time. So thanks for having us. Let's get started. Vinnie, the Pilsner is being poured. You may spend 15 seconds talking about the Pilsner, and then I want to talk to you about beatification, because it's my favorite sour beer.
We can just skip the beatification.
Okay, good. So, beatification is actually my second favorite sour beer on earth. The one that beat you, which I think you will agree, is Rosé de Gambrinus.
From Cantillon.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, that's my number one. Beatification number 2. Comes out once a year, and you're actually pouring it this year a little sooner than you wanted to, and I thought maybe you could teach us about that. Why it matters when you serve it.
Yeah, so this was a pre-release, so any of you had our beatification today, which 15 gallons ran out in about an hour and a half. We poured 15 gallons of spontaneous fermented beer. So things have come a long ways in America. We had John Gorman from John I. Haas pouring for us. He pours a little heavy. Might be why we're out. So sorry to those that didn't get any.
God bless him.
You know, that's what you get when you have a hop salesman pouring sour beer. So, but in all seriousness, this is 100% spontaneous fermented beer. We have a open fermenter, what we call a horny tank. So the horny tank is this open vessel that the wort, the unfermented beer, flows into. We let it sit anywhere from 12 to 36 hours. And then from there, we go into the barrels. It's in that time that it picks up all the wild yeast in the air, all the bacteria that's in the room. And then within 7 days, fermentation starts in the barrel. And then from that point, it's going to sit for up to 24 months, depending on what else we have going on. Wow. And we call that Synambic. Lambic is Belgian spontaneous fermented beer. That's a protected term. I hope that all of us up here agree that you would never want to call your American spontaneous beer lambic. It's as much of an appellation to the Belgians, and it's a respect to our friends in Belgium that are making spontaneous beer that we don't want to use the term lambic. So we came up with this playful use of the word Sonoma, where our brewery is, and lambic, so Synambic together. So we make Synambic, that's the base beer. We'll then take multiple batches of Synambic, blend them together, and make beatification. And so this is a pre-release of what we had on tap today. It still will be 3-4 months, maybe even 6 months. And what I tasted in the beer young, and it's still there, is a little bit of phenolic quality. The phenols that are produced from the Brettanomyces yeast, that's one of the special yeasts that are used in the spontaneous beer, can throw these almost leathery, I'll say rubbery Goodyear tire quality, and there's a little bit of that still in the beer, and those still need to age out, and that will age out over time. Natalie and I have been lucky enough to taste really young lambic in Belgium, so we know what the progression is, and so we're just in that path right now. We bottled this beer, and it was in the re-fermentation that some of these additional flavors kind of kicked up. Okay. So we're now just going to wait for them to settle down. For us, it doesn't matter if we have to wait 3 months or 6 months. We want to release the beer when it's in good shape.
You say it doesn't matter, but there are then barrels and a large volume of beer, i.e. money, sitting at the brewery waiting for you to be ready to release. That's a unique business model.
It is, yeah. All of us are in this position. It's not just Russian River, that these are very expensive beers to make, and we're taking up a lot of square footage, a lot of space for barrels. In the case of beatification, it's already bottled, so it's sitting in one of our warehouses. We're making more spontaneous beer for future batches, but that's a part of these beers. Another part of these beers is loss. You're going to always be dumping some volume of sour barrel fermented beer, whether it's spontaneous or not.
Why do you dump it? Because it's not right?
It's not right. There may be off flavors. Maybe some of these guys can talk about it, but you could have multiple barrels, sometimes no barrels. In all of the beers that we make that are sour barrel aged, whether it's spontaneous or not, the beer tells us when they're ready. Okay. It's not a normal beer like Pliny the Elder. It's 6 days fermentation, 2-day rest after that, dry hop for 10 to 12 days, filter it, bottle and keg it, and it's done. Okay. It's a 21-day cycle every time. It's very predictable every time, but in these sour barrel aged beers, it's just the opposite. They tell us when they're ready.
I don't envy you for doing it, but I'm glad you do. I would hate to have to sit around and wait, but yeah, we get the beer because of it. All right, so one thing that I want to be hopefully a topic here is to talk about how sour beer changes over time, because I think that this is something very unique to the type of bacteria and yeast that's in sour beer. So hopefully as we go through the panel, we can talk about that. In other words, this beer, I know that sometimes these guys taste a beer in the middle of the process, and it's awful. It tastes like a failure. It tastes like maybe they really screwed something up. And literally 12 months later, it could be the best Salambic, in this example, that you've ever had. So maybe as we go through, we can talk about that, because that is unique to sour beer. Jim Crooks from Barrelworks is here. A new program. How long has the Barrelworks program from Firestone been around, Jim?
It started in 2007 is when we started putting some critters, I say we call them critters, in barrels behind the brewery way back in a warm warehouse. Okay. I think you sent me some chips of Brettanomyces at that point, and I got bold enough to put them in a barrel, and I hid the barrels under a tarp because I didn't want anyone knowing what I was doing, because I was very nervous about what the outcome might be, because it wasn't that 12-day turnaround beer that I knew very to my soul. It was like, this is not the same yeast we play with in the brewery. So that started it, and with the help of Vinnie and Lauren, we got a program of about 6-7 barrels going. By 2012, I think we had about 20 or 30 barrels going that were, and there were some small amounts of beer coming out of that program, and that was at the point when David Walker really saw the vision and allowed us the option to bring this program down to Buellton, which is, it's a facility in Buellton which was designed to be a brewery, but Firestone purchased a brewery up in Paso Robles before we could break ground on the brewery in Buellton. So basically we had a nice warehouse, a lot of space, about 14,000 square feet warehouse, sitting empty with a bunch of wines and couches in it.
Nice.
Yeah, we were lounging.
Couches are required to make great beer.
There should be a couch in every brewery.
Yes.
But at that point, we got the A-OK to start really growing this program. So in 2012, we grew the program from about 28 barrels to over about 600 barrels.
Wow.
And then since then, we've grown the program to over 1,000 barrels.
So we can finally thank David Walker for coming to his senses and letting you guys do a massive barrel program.
Well, I think you'd have to equally thank Adam Firestone for kicking me out of Paso Robles.
Okay, good.
He knew he didn't want that up there, and I knew the danger of it, being it wild and totally, open to the environment.
So this is a good point.
I'm a lab guy by trade.
So they literally wouldn't allow you to be in the main brewery where you ferment, for lack of a better term, clean beer. You had to move to another location just to do this.
That's very correct. I mean, we started off in a warehouse we had purchased. It held wine. It was on the property, but it held wine. It smelled very funky. And sure enough, like Matt's like, hey, what about that place for making beer? I was like, sure, let's do it. So I was pushing these barrels in any corner that people would allow me to. And at the point in 2012, having that warehouse down in Buellton open up was a godsend for us.
Jim's key doesn't even work in Paso Robles anymore.
He's not allowed in.
He's not allowed in.
He has to wear a clean suit.
I'm not allowed in a couple places down in Buellton either.
Right. For different reasons.
It's always funny to be a sour beer brewer in a wine region, as both Jim and I are, because the winemakers look at you like with a little bit of a shady eye, and they don't trust you.
Yeah.
There's a distiller down in Buellton that has a sign on his door that says, if you've been to Barrelworks, you can't come in.
Wow. I love that. That is sort of something to be proud of. That's a badge of honor. All right next to Jim, we have Chad Yakobson. Damn it!
Yakobson.
See, 10 years and 5 minutes wasn't enough. Yakobson from Crooked Stave. And now Chad is unique in this group because he is really very much a sour beer scientist. His whole position on making this beer that we love is to research it and to actually compile a body of work so that we can understand how sour beer really works. And so in other words, he's a very experimental brewer, and I think luckily, the results are always fantastic. We get to taste all of your fantastic experiments, Chad.
Good. So they're working so far then?
They're working so far.
Because that's the thing about experiments, is that they don't always work.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do them and you really realize, this is why you don't do this. Okay, this doesn't work.
Well, you must
then
be
you do
dumping
something
out
else.
the ones that don't work, because I haven't had a bad one yet. So
Something like that.
yeah, well done. So tell us about the project, Crooked Stave.
So Crooked Stave Artisan Beer Project. We're in Denver, Colorado, and up until even now, actually, we still don't have a brew house of our own, which has always been really interesting. So we started by growing through barrels, brewing batches, fermenting them, bringing them in, aging them in oak. Did quite a lot of batches that were 100% Brettanomyces batches, different stuff with Brettanomyces, while we were continuing to...
Tell them what bread is.
Brettanomyces? It's a wild yeast, but it's not a wild yeast.
What
because we
would
use
be
it in
the
lab.
scientific definition of Brettanomyces? I want to hear this.
The scientific definition, well, in Latin, Brettanomyces means British brewing fungus. So this is a yeast that really has always been around in beers, very typical of English beers. This is usually the part where I make a crack about English brewers. But having just actually been in London and England recently, there's some phenomenal beer being brewed in England. So I can't really say anything that negative anymore about Friends. But the beer tasted really nice probably back in the day when it had Brettanomyces. Went through an iffy period for about 100 years, and it's getting better now. Probably because more brewers in London are actually starting to brew Brettanomyces beers. That might be why. But Brettanomyces then as a yeast, it's not Saccharomyces. It's absolutely not bacteria either. It is another yeast that likes to ferment, albeit a bit finicky. Actually, I think it's Vinnie who's the one who likes to call it the cat versus the dog. Saccharomyces is the...
Yeah, Saccharomyces is the dog. Saccharomyces is regular yeast. And so
Why?
You can train your dog to sit, to fetch, to heel, do all these things. Whereas Brettanomyces is a cat, which is what Chad was going to. If you call for your cat, she'll run the other way. If you pick her up, she'll scratch you.
Yep.
No, that's
But when
what
she
bread
works,
is.
it's very rewarding.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that's essentially the definition of our brewery, is just trying to herd and wrangle cats through all our fooders, through all our barrels, through all the beers we're making. And it basically means that if I tell you something today, in 1 year I'll be doing something different. So continue to listen to all those old interviews. It's absolutely what we're still doing.
In the words of the great Armand Debler from Drefontaine, he came to our brewery and said, "This is a man that's had brewing in his veins for probably over 100 years." Said, "You could never know Brett."
Nice. And by the way, just as an example of this brewing community, I did an interview with Chad several years ago, all about how he's doing this project and how yeast works. And I believe about a year after that, I saw Vinnie at another event, and he said, "Hey, I'm listening to Chad's interview, and it's fantastic. I'm learning a lot." These guys all really collaborate and learn together from what they're doing because it's so unknowable in a sense that you're starving for information from each other to figure out how to make this stuff work.
Yeah, absolutely. Even fortunate enough to, I remember coming out and visiting Jim in, I think it was 2012, when it was only 20 barrels, and we're tasting through the Flanders and tasting through the stuff when it was still up in Paso. Jim's kind of like, "Yeah, so this one's on this generation. We've done this many times. What do you think about it? We're about to grow it and stuff." And so to see where the project is now, it's pretty phenomenal.
I love it.
That's kind of how it all is between everyone.
Yeah.
Trying different beers, talking about it, what works, what are you doing, and watching this progression. As Vinnie said for Beatification, pretty amazing to see where the American beer scene is at.
Beautiful. I feel like we're at the Oscars giving an acceptance speech where they start to turn up the music because we're supposed to stop talking or something, but we're not going to do that. Luke Dickinson from Wicked Weed. Now, he's a brewer up here from Asheville, North Carolina, and didn't move to North Carolina to open a brewery. You were already there.
Sure, I was already there. Yeah,
That's right.
That's right. That's
Tell
my
us about
home.
Wicked Weed.
Yeah. What'd you say?
Tell us about Wicked Weed.
Okay, so Wicked Weed, we're kind of in the same boat as Firestone Walker, in size as well. Not really. We're a new brewery. We're 2.5 years old. We're only making right now about 6,000 barrels a year. But it's all in a pub system. We got a production brewery going online this year, but we keep everything completely separate, just like the Firestone guys do. And a lot of that is due to me. I have a brother, his name's Walt. He looks just like me. And
He's a little dumber.
He's definitely dumber. But he runs the sour program, actually. I run the non-sour program at our brewery. I have a healthy fear, I think is the best way to put it, of Brettanomyces and the bacteria that comes along with sour beer, Lactobacillus pediococcus mainly. But so we produce all of our wort at our pub in Asheville, and about 3 blocks down the road we have our Funkatorium, which is where that we have our barrel house, another tasting room, and that's where we ferment and age all of our sour beer. It didn't start out that way. Our sour program started out what my brother really wanted to do sour beer, and I was kind of weary of the idea of bringing that in the brewery. So I told him, all right, you can do it, but you gotta, like, Brett cannot come in the brewery. So he's like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? So I told him, buy a long hose, put the barrels in the parking lot, and go to town.
Really?
So yeah, we started our brewery actually with our sour program. We would brew the wort, we would ferment it with Saison yeast actually, and then we would it was this long piece of shit hose that he had to use too. It wasn't even like a brewer's hose. And
You are the asshole brother.
I kind of am. And he would fill the barrels in the parking lot, and then we invested, quote unquote, in a U-Haul for about $1,000 that lasted about 6 months. That he would load the barrels onto the back of the truck and drive them 30 minutes down the road to a warehouse that we had. So I mean, it was the dumbest thing in the world. But he muscled through it. So eventually we actually put some money into the program, and now we have a really beautiful warehouse for our sour beer just down the road, about 3 blocks.
And now that you've sat on this panel, you're not allowed back in the regular brewery for 6 months.
Yeah, actually.
Because you're just next to these guys.
I know, yeah.
It's on your sleeve.
I've got a bottle of hand sanitizer that I'm going to rub all over myself.
Right.
When I get back. But actually, that is true. We have a total separate staff for our sour program, and for those of you that don't know, the wild yeast and the bacteria are extremely infectious, and that's why that Vinnie has invested in totally separate hoses and pumps and all this stuff, and I'm sure that Firestone has as well. Chad just doesn't give a shit, I guess, but
Actually, we have 3 sets of pumps, 3 sets of
Really?
hoses. Yeah,
Really?
we have
Thank
3
you.
sets of beers. We actually have clean beers now, about to happen. We have only Brettanomyces beers and only sour beers, and we separate all 3. So the Brettanomyces only beers can't be contaminated with the sour beers.
wow.
Yep.
I like this topic because my impression, Vinny, was always that you're sort of the exception to this rule. You do your sour beers right in the same brew house as all your other beers. Do you not fear contamination like everybody else?
No, but we do have everything separate.
You do?
So, yeah.
So separate hoses and...
My guess is all you guys saw our program from just CB presentations that I've given. But yeah, we have red is funky, so that means everything. Bacteria, Brett, regular yeast, all mixed in on that equipment. White is totally clean beer, so that would be like Pliny the Elder, all of our IPAs, Pilsner, whatever. And then blue is just Brett. So we have 3 sets, just like Chad was
And
saying.
that goes for pumps as well, which is expensive equipment to have multiple...
We have separate pumps, filters, fillers, hoses.
Wow.
With tanks, we have separate tanks. Our old...
I would say, but you still clean everything exceptionally well.
Yeah, and we still
use the same set of SOPs as they should for anything. So just a tidbit for everybody out there, like, we're not skipping corners because this is sour, because this is not wine making, this is still beer making.
Yeah.
You still want to clean everything. You don't want to second guess your cleanliness.
We ended up taking all of our old packaging equipment when Firestone started, and they borrowed it for a long time. And I think David went to Jim and was like, we still have Russian Rivers equipment? And I was like, yeah, whatever. Maybe we, and David was like, maybe we should just buy it from them. So they're using all of our old packaging equipment. So again, it shows the congenial side of this, and we're all friends. And as our friend at Dogfish said, Sam Calgione said, the craft beer industry is 99% asshole free. And it's this sharing of information and exchange that's so beautiful.
However, you are also on record on one of my shows saying that Sam sold you a total piece of shit brewery. Those were your words, not mine. You can go back and listen. Luke.
Well, I was just gonna, I think that it's a really important thing for people to know that the investment side that it does take. This is a large reason why you don't see, and why that sour beer is growing slowly. Even though it's becoming wildly popular, it's growing slowly because there's a huge investment that you have to make to create a sour brewery. Pumps, hoses, separate equipment, but also the amount of time and space. Our Funkatorium is 9,000 square feet. We have about just shy of 800 wood barrels in there, and we're going to produce about 2,000 barrels, beer barrels of sour beer. Yeah. Our pub is 1,600 square feet, and we produce over 5,000 barrels in that space. So, it's an enormous investment for breweries to take to do sour beer properly.
It's sort of bittersweet for someone like me because I've liked sour beer for years now, and it used to be really easy to get. And now, even though more of you are making it, it's sort of harder to get because it's people love it, they're buying more of it, and you're making small batches of it. So, Chad, is it your beer that we have in our glass right now, I think? No? Oh, this is Wicked Wheat. So tell us about this beer, Luke.
Okay. So this is Red Angel that you're drinking on. Red Angel is... we do a series of angels. So this was the first of the angels. Outside of, we do one called Black Angel that's always going at our facility. It's with cherries, aged in bourbon barrels. This one is raspberry sour. So this is a little over 2 pounds per gallon of raspberries. So it's an enormous amount of fruit. We ferment our beer, all of our beer, with 100% Brettanomyces on the sour side, and then we move our beer into a blending tank at that point. We have a mother sour that we call cassette, and cassette is how we inoculate all of our sour beer. So basically the beer comes into the Funkatorium with just Brettanomyces. It then gets blended in with cassette to get our bacteria in there. And then at that point, we're going to add half of our fruit to the beer. So in this case, we add a little over 1 pound per gallon of raspberries into the beer. Let it sit on that for about a week, and then we'll move it into wine barrels or cognac barrels. These were, Red Angel was one of our first beers that we've aged in puncheons. Puncheons are a 500-liter wood vessel, so they're bigger than the normal wine barrels that you'd see, but not quite as big as like a Foder would be. But with that, it was interesting to see how the bacteria reacted, and that's the interesting and fun thing about doing sour beer is that the vessel that it's in, the wood vessel, it completely changes the timing and all of that. Like Vinnie was saying, we got to wait for the beer to be ready. So most of our sours take us about 10 months to do a sour. This one was about 16 months for the Red Angel. And I think that a large part of that was due to less surface area for the bacteria. I mean, you would be able to speak better to it than I would, Chad.
Let these guys jump in because I can see their wheels turning as you...
What's the base beer called?
Cassette.
Do you make one called 8-track too?
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a vinyl.
We should. Yeah. Yeah. No, we spelled it all.
You can have that one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Trademark
Thank
that
you. Yeah.
right
I will.
now.
I will. No, we spell it all fancy and try to be,
Fancier.
whatever, poetic.
There's an umlaut.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
By the way, as we're talking, if any of you have questions, line up right here at the microphone because we're getting to that period of time where we're going to wrap things up. So if you want to ask these guys about the beer. Chad, I thought I saw your head turning a little bit as he was describing the beer too, at least the inoculation beer. Do you guys have something that you inoculate all your beers with?
We do, actually. We have a mixed culture that, we just keep going all the time throughout our house. It's in all the beers that we want it to be in so far. And it's kind of really something that we actually pulled from our fooders. So very fortunate, again, you hear the same thing coming out of everyone's mouth, but the friendships throughout the industry and where you're able to get cultures from and stuff like that. So we got some really nice, very old, acclimated cultures, and so we were really able to hit the ground going, and that kind of spread throughout our system. Okay. So even beers that we primary ferment with Saison yeast and Brettanomyces then goes into our fooders to age longer, and we have the mixed culture. And we use that in everything throughout. In the beginning, we tried to just keep it in the wine barrels. Then we let it spread to our fooders, and we keep those rotating through to keep the culture going. We, over the past 12 months, about a year, we'll empty the foeders completely sometimes and knock them back and re-inoculate them with beer with some of our favorite barrels. And the past time we did that about 12 months ago, we also pulled some of that, the last bit of beer, really nice yeast culture at the bottom, pulled it out with a pump and primary fermented with it. And that's actually the petite sour that we have is 100% mixed culture fermentation from the beginning. And so it comes in, ferments, all the bacteria, all the Brett, wild yeast, whatever's in it, it's in it. And that's what we're primary fermenting those beers with. And we're starting to do a lot of different beers like that, being able to primary ferment with them. And so it is kind of crucial when those bugs, when that comes in, and how those affect the beers throughout.
Okay.
Have you guys? I mean, we're the youngest sour brewery on the panel here, so I'm just curious, because we've seen it in our program since we have cassette. That's kind of this ever-living sour. I mean, we've seen quite a bit of change in the flavors. I'm sure you guys are experiencing kind of the same thing, or
There are CDs now, MP3s.
Yeah, exactly.
Things have really evolved.
It's amazing.
Yes.
A lot of our cultures we brought into the brewery with intention to build up and start using and kind of testing them out. And again, just like Chad said, we kind of rely on a few of them now. I think it was kind of our intention from my background being a yeast wrangler was to kind of bank things in the beginning at an infantile stage before they've changed and mutated into something that the barrel program wanted them to be. I mean, that involves temperature, involves the beer that was placed in that barrel, their environment. These things mutate very quickly to their environment. So we always would pull a small portion away, put it in a vial or some kind of container, keep it very safe and cold, and eventually come back to it over the course of, like, say, a year or something. Like you said, you can tell there's difference in culture. You might start smelling difference. You might start seeing difference in acid production or aroma production. So I think it's very smart for people that are using mixed cultures to, once they get something in-house that they like, try to bank that and keep it away from everything else and something you can come back to.
All right, let's take some crowd questions here. What do you got for us?
Hi, I love all of your beers, so thank you. Okay, is this close enough?
Yeah, it's very uncomfortable, I know.
This is really weird. I love all you guys, thanks a lot. I have two questions. So one is sour beer versus wild beer. There's sort of this bias associated with the terminology used. I'm curious what your opinions are on that, if you have any. And then also, more specifically, how have you noticed, what's the difference between using a large capacity volume foeder or another recipient or a container for aging your beers versus a smaller container like a barrel? Is there a very large difference when you're using Brett versus, for example, bacterial cocktail when you're aging?
All right, good questions. So question number one, is there a difference between sour and wild, and why do people say the two different things?
I imagine this one actually could be interesting. You might get 4 different answers here. For me, the way I think of it, I think of wild as a very broad category, kind of like ale, lager, wild. And a wild can be a Saison with Brettanomyces, no acidity. It could be a Brettanomyces beer. It could be a very sour beer. It's kind of a very broad term for a family of beers, whereas sour to me is very specific. For me, intrinsically in my head, sour means that the beer has aged for maybe 12 months, 16 months. So they're the ones that have really aged for a while, have that acidity, more complex. So you would still have other beers. For instance, we make some beers that get acidic faster because of the culture, and we don't call those sour beers. We describe them by saying they're tart. We still call them by the Saison that the base was and stuff. So that's just my perspective. Essentially, what makes a wild beer is people are purposely using Brettanomyces or bacteria, and I think of it as a big family. Whereas sour, it's very specific. It's long, barrel aged, complex. So.
Okay. Follow up on that, and I know Chad agrees with me 100%. We agree with this. like wholeheartedly, don't ever call a beer that only has Brett as the fermenter with no bacteria sour beer. There's a big misconception on the consumer side that Brettanomyces, this wild yeast or domesticated wild yeast, makes a sour beer. It makes a very, very small amount of acidity. And, this is what Chad studied in school, but it doesn't make a sour beer. And it's actually one of the places where the media gets it wrong more times than not. And so I know as an industry, we're all trying to move forward to educate the consumer that Brettanomyces gives you a wild, funky, earthy, leathery, all these odd characteristics that Brett creates, but it makes a tiny amount of acidity, but it does not make a sour beer.
Yeah. So could we simplify it by saying that if it didn't have Pediococcus or Lactobacillus, it is a wild beer, and if it does have pedio or lacto, it's a sour beer? Or is it not that simple?
I think of wild as the broadest category. So sour beers are also wild beers.
Okay.
It's kind of a family. The way ale is. An IPA is an ale. A porter, unless done with lager yeast, is an ale. A stout's an ale. And so you have specifics within them. So the general term would be like wild. But if you want, a golden sour, a dark sour, a Saison Brett, we have a Brettanomyces IPA. It's very clean. It's very hoppy. It's no acidity in it. That would fall under wild. Basically, I just think of it as a family.
Okay.
So if you say sour, you're saying I specifically want something that's long barrel aged, has bacteria in it. If you say you want something wild, it could mean sour. It could mean tart. It could mean a Saison bottle conditioned with Brett.
Okay.
It's kind of a larger
That's a good
family
answer.
of beers.
That makes sense.
I think it's something that we care about as brewers, that people understand this, because with a Brett beer, you can actually turn a Brett beer pretty quickly. Whereas, these sour, the true sour beers with the bacterias, they take a lot of time. So it really is something that, we live with for a long time, these barrels of beer, and we care a ton about the way that they're perceived in the marketplace. So I think that was an awesome question to kind of clear that up. But yeah. Wild, not necessarily sour. Or not necessarily. Yeah. So Brett beer is not sour. Yeah.
At Barrelworks, we use the terminology of just called it American Wild, even if it's sour, just to be safe, because sour is such a nondescript description of a beer. I mean,
it is. Yeah.
For people's palates, sour could be just a little bit beyond what a Pilsner is. I mean, it could be a little bit tart on the taste.
Sure.
Like a 4.0 pH could be tart and sour for somebody. Whereas if you bring in the terminology wild, I mean, we're talking Brettanomyces at that point, or we're talking as it goes further, Brett does get tart.
Okay.
And as it goes further, it gets sour. I mean, we all know that.
By the way, for non-beer geeks, offering them a sour beer sounds horrible. Like, it's a terrible thing to offer somebody. Hey, would you like a sour beer?
Yeah.
I also have this moldy steak if you'd like to have it. Like, it's not a nice way to describe beer for people who don't know.
No, and I am hoping, and we talked about this when we did our interview on your show, that, people understand hoppy beer now very well, and they understand hoppy beer is like pale ale, is less hoppy than IPA, is less hoppy than double IPA. There's nothing like that in sour beer yet, and I really think at some point we need to create some sort of expectation, because our sour beer at Wicked Weed is really not quite as tart as, like, I see Jay over here from Rare Barrel. They make terrible beer, but
Jay's the handsome guy right there with the hat.
He is very handsome. No, but I mean, Jay's making world-class, unbelievable sour beer, but some of his beers are more tart than the Red Angel that you just tasted. So I would love there to eventually be some sort of differentiator to come in. All
right, we're running out of time, but I want to answer question number 2 quickly, and then it looks like Jay has a question as well. Yeah, question number 2 was just about the size of the vessel that you guys are fermenting this stuff in.
So more surface area on a fooder, a big wood tank. So there's more air ingress through the wood on the top, which potentially means more acetic acid or acetobacter, which is balsamic vinegar. You have less of that on a small barrel. For me personally, I like having a lot small barrels. It just gives us more of a palette to work from. Neither are right or wrong, but that's the quick basic answer to that. So, and because the wood isn't on the top of the foeder isn't in contact with liquid. It's drying out more, so it's more porous. And then you also have the wood type. If it's a different type of oak, some oaks are more porous than others.
From a consistency standpoint, though, the idea of the foeder is a much more consistent conglomerate of beer versus the barrel, the small barrel. When you have a batch pushed into, say, 20 or 30 different barrels, there's so much more variability when it comes down to blend. Yeah. I mean, you're looking at volume per square liter of wood, and then also you're looking at inoculating every single barrel, and you're looking for consistency for that sake. But when it comes down to blending, that's where the big factor would be the amount of barrels versus the foeder, which is one giant batch.
That makes sense. All right, Jay, did you have a question? And by the way, Jay's company, The Rare Barrel, is responsible for almost every brewer's hangover here this morning because they were pouring copious amounts of beer last night.
Thank you for that.
Which we thank them for until this morning. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, just a real quick question. Maybe a quick anecdote from each of you guys, starting with Luke, how you guys fell in love with sour beer.
So I didn't, is the short answer.
Still.
I say it all the time. I'm not a huge fan of sour beer, even though I'm
You may leave.
But we make it. No, my brother fell in love with sour beer. Thank you very much for that question, Jay. He knows that about me. So you're kind of calling me out. But, I love the process of sour beer is my bullshit answer that I'll give you. But it's it's an amazing thing. It takes so much time and energy and craft to do it. That's all I have to say. I don't know.
Good.
That's all I got.
Shut up, Luke. Chad, what made you fall in love with sour beer?
Sour beer made me fall in love with sour beer.
Okay.
The idea of it, and the fact that there was this one brewery in Fort Collins who used to have cork and cage bottles on the shelf, and you could be 20 years old and pre-drink that before going to the bars in college. That made me love sour beer, I think.
All right. Jim?
For me, I think it was the flavors that the beers presented from Belgium that were so oddball and so far-fetched from what I was normally used to in Firestone Walker's portfolio.
Yeah.
And that made me just really think outside the box on what could be done, and it's just a departure from what normal beer was for me.
Just the potential, yeah.
Potential.
Okay. And Vinnie, what made you?
And I just wanted to take my favorite part of, at the time, the only Belgian lambic I had, which was Cantillon.
Yeah.
Favorite part was Brettanomyces, and use it in barrels, Chardonnay barrels, to make a beer called Temptation. And that's how it all got started for us. Two wine barrels, and now we have about 600. As it turns out, in exactly about 7 minutes.
You're going to clear out the crowd.
We're pouring, we have 15 liters of 6-year-old Temptation at our booth. So if you want to come over and join me, Natalie and I are going to run off, and we've got a 9-liter and a 6-liter if you want to come over and join us and drink the bottles.
There you go. All right, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you for sticking with us. Go have some great beer. We've got another panel coming up at 3 o'clock. Also, they're going to do a presentation where they're going to give away a donation right now. Firestone Walker's going to do that. Vinnie, Jim, Chad, Luke, thanks, guys, for being up here. And thank you all for sticking with us.
The Brewing Network.